Hey everybody, it's John with Georgia Fencing Academy, and today we're going to discuss a little bit about Armory. Now, Armory, in the perspective of fencing or the sport of fencing, is covering just about every facet of weapon repair, maintenance, and the electronic equipment associated with the sport of fencing. Historically, the definition of Armory is a place where weapons are kept or supply of arms for defense or attack. At a fencing club, it's a location for the repair and storage of fencing weapons. Now, what we're going to be covering today is basically focusing on one weapon, which is epee. And the reason why is because here in Atlanta, this is an epee heavy town. We have a strong saber presence also, but because of the high school leagues in the area, as well as the majority of the clubs here in Georgia focusing on this one weapon, I think that this would probably be more beneficial to everybody in the community. Also, we're looking at building a basic toolkit, something that you can take on the road with you to quickly repair weapons as needed. We're looking at spring and tip cleaning, i.e. the interior of the barrel. That's normally where the majority of your problems are going to lie. And how to rewire a blade. That's something that a lot of people seem to have a lot of trouble with. Just quick troubleshooting tips also for body cords. How to test body cords, as well as how to replace one on strip when you need to quickly. And of course, general blade maintenance care, how to keep them from rusting. A little bit of everything that you'll need when you are out on strip or maybe at home to maintain your weapons in a proper working order. Now, understanding that there is more than one way to skin a cat, so if you have any comments that can benefit the video, can benefit other people watching the video, tips and tricks that you may have, please leave them in the comments section below. Other than that, let's get to work. All right, so I'd like to introduce Houston Fullerton to you. He's an epee fencer here at GFA. He's also our technical go-to guy. He's the one that we send all the heavy lifting to when it comes to repair on reels or scoring machines. So the focus here on why epee is because it's an epee heavy town. It's the most popular here in Atlanta. It's the most popular weapon in the state defense, as well as with the USFA.
Thanks for the intro, John. For today's video, I think we're just going to focus on some of the basics of the weapon itself and some simple repairs that you'll commonly find in the sport. Yeah, and you know, understand something. There's more than one way to skin a cat here. If you've got something that you want to share, maybe a quick and dirty way of fixing a weapon, or maybe a tip or a trick, more than welcome to add it into the comments section, because you know everybody has a different way of doing things, and anything that would simplify the process would be greatly appreciated. A couple of things to remember when it comes to weapons and body cords, especially on strip. Make sure, by the rules, you have at least 2 weapons and 2 body cords at the back of the strip with you, or you have 1 weapon in hand and 1 weapon and body cord at the back of the strip, so that if one fails, either weapon or body cord, then you're not stuck trying to scramble to borrow a teammate's weapon, and you can avoid a yellow card. All right, so let's divide everything into 2 sections. One is what you would take out into the field, and the other would be for repairs at home. So what you would take into the field and use on strip or at a competition would be a bottle of glue to lay down wires, shims and weights for testing weapons, specifically distance on the point, as well as contact springs, as well as pressure springs. Test kit, a test kit or a test box for testing connectivity on the weapon. A nice tin with a magnet in it, you know, for holding screws as well as tips.
magnetic screwdrivers, maybe a cotton swab or two for cleaning out barrels, a pair of pliers just to kind of hold things, extra pommel nuts also, a inside hex or outside hex pommel nut, 6mm, extra tips, springs, screws. We're looking at contact springs here, tip screws, as well as pressure springs, and of course wrenches, 6mm inside hex wrench, as well as a 6mm outside hex wrench, and a couple of, or maybe one set of needle nose pliers to reattach wires that come disconnected, or that may become disconnected from the socket. Now for home, whenever you're putting a weapon together or doing some heavy maintenance on the weapon, bolt cutter to cut down tangs, a piece of pipe here to basically bend or cant a weapon, a voltmeter for connectivity. This is a body wire or a body cord tester that Houston built to connectivity for A, B, and C channels. A nice tray, a magnetic tray for holding larger parts, larger screwdriver for socket posts, a wire, can't miss that, a tip setter to set the tips into the barrel, a lighter to burn off residual insulation on the wires, both the superficial layer, which is the cotton layer, as well as potentially the plastic layers underneath that you can't see. Of course, sandpaper to clean weapons with. This is a chain used for bending blades to lay the wire into the channel. Here we've got a set of wire strippers, which would be necessary for pulling off some of the insulation once you add that extra layer of spaghetti to the Epee wire. A table vise, a small table vise in this case for canting the weapon, as well as holding the blade in place while maybe you're attaching a barrel or attaching screws. And of course a acetone tube for melting off residual glue after you strip the wire out and you want to go ahead and clean the blade thoroughly and then add another wire into it. So the general anatomy of an epee would be, a total breakdown would be the barrel tip, the wire running down the length of the blade itself.
And then from there we have our bell guard, our socket, bell pad, grip, and then lock washer and nut if you're using a pistol grip, or your French grip and pommel.
And continuing with anatomy of an epee, let's talk about epee points, the tip specifically, or the anatomy of the tip. We're going to start with the wire cap and the two leads at the bottom of the barrel that are, the blade is connected to the barrel, the cap is at the bottom of the barrel. Then we have the pressure spring that offers resistance to the tip, and the contact spring, which is connected directly to the tip. The contact spring makes contact with the two leads on the wire cap, completing the circuit, basically making the light go off. Here we have the screws that hold the tip into the barrel and the tip itself, which when depressed and that contact is made, again, scores a point.
So next we're going to be talking about the epee socket itself. Now this is the component that sits inside of your bell guard and you would plug your body cord into. Typically most fencers keep this on the palm side of their hand, but occasionally fencers do choose to put this on the back side of their hand inside the bell guard. Now the socket is the component, like I said, that receives your body cord. Now this both transfers electrical signal down the wire to your tip, as well as the ground portion of our circuit to your body cord and any other metal parts that touch the arm of this socket. Now the socket itself is made up of a number of components, including the posts that screw into the socket itself, washers that you would place underneath the wires when you're assembling the socket. There's also a clip to hold your body cord in place, and then a piece of metal that goes from the arm to one of the posts for ground. Now, if you can look over here at the top view, there's also a little cutout on the side of the socket. This is typically where most fencers choose to place to fish their wires through. This keeps the wires protected on the outside and keeps them from getting caught by any fingers.
So let's talk about epee grips now. There are two types of grips used in epee. One is the traditional French grip, the standard straight grip that you've seen here, as well as the newer, I say newer as of the 1920s, the orthopedic grip or the pistol grip. Now, as I had said, this was invented in the 1920s for people that had an injury of the hand and they wanted to be able to continue to fence, but they couldn't facilitate a French grip. Now, the grips are held into place with a series of different apparatus. One is a locking nut, or lock washer, sorry, which is put into the grip here itself that keeps the pommel nut, or the pommel, from becoming loose and tearing up the insulation on your wire. Now, what is the pommel or pommel nut? A pommel nut holds the pistol grip or the grip into place, securing it to the tang of the weapon. The pommel here for French grip is basically the counterweight to the blade. Normally they range anywhere between 80 grams, which is the rough weight of this pommel, all the way to 250, I'm seeing 275 grams, which is a great counterweight balance for the back of the weapon.
Alright, so now that we've discussed the components of an epee, let's prep a blade for wiring. Now, here I have a brand new uncut epee. If we're using an epee that you had previously that had maybe an electrical problem, maybe your wires were broken, then we would take that epee and start by removing the wire that was in the channel, and then we would soak the epee in acetone to remove any remaining glue that was in the channel. But here, since we have something that's brand new, we don't have to do that. Now, the first step that we're going to do is to cut the tang to length. If you're using a French grip, you typically don't have to do this, but for the sake of this video, we'll set this weapon up to be a pistol Visconti grip. So to cut the tang, first you have to set the length for the tang. If you don't know the length of your tang, you can take the grip that you're going to use, place it down on the tang, and then with a marker or a piece of tape or even your finger, you can mark where the tang would meet the opening for the grip. Now, you would typically want the tang length to be a little bit below this point, so that way once you install your pommel nut, you don't have anything pushing into your palm. You don't want your nut to stick outside of the grip opening. If you've already set up your weapons in the past, then you could use some kind of pre-made marker. We have a piece of spaghetti tubing insulation here that we can use to set the length for our tang. Once we have the desired length set, then we actually have to cut the tang. Typically people will do this with maybe a pair of bolt cutters. You can also use a rotary tool if you have that with a cutting wheel, or you can use a hacksaw. If you're using the bolt cutters, then once you cut the tang itself, you'll have a rough edge here, and maybe your threads won't line up perfectly. So if that's the case, then you'll typically have to file down the rough edge of the blade, and then you can take a die tool and start to rethread it by spinning this on. And once it spins freely, then you know that you've got your thread set properly. From this point, we have our blade length set. The next step would be to bend the tang, or to cant the weapon. This is something that you want to do typically to keep your point a little bit more on target when you're fencing. So most fencers will bend their tang downwards and then inside, depending on which hand they are. Since I'm left-handed, if we're looking at this from my perspective, then I would bend the blade to the right, or the tang to the right if you're looking at it tang side. If you're right-handed, then you would bend it towards the left. People can do this a number of ways. You can put your blade into a vise and put a sturdy piece of pipe over the tang itself and bend that into whichever position you'd like, usually down and to the side. If you don't have that available and you do have a sturdy vise set up, you can set the tang into the vise and then raise the blade up maybe a millimeter or two from the base of the blade and then bend it into place. Once we've got our tang bent and cut to length, the final step of prepping your blade is going to be adding the barrel. Now, the barrel will screw on to the threads at the end of your blade. When I do this, I like to add a little bit of blue Loctite to the threads just to make sure that the barrel doesn't loosen up at all. So if we're using Loctite, once you have that applied then you can, and dried, you can take the barrel, thread it into place by hand, and then tighten it. When you're tightening the barrel, you want to make sure not to over tighten it and just get it down enough so that way you don't strip out your threads. When doing this, if you have a vise available, the best way is to insert the blade until you've got maybe an inch or so sticking outside of the vise. Our table's not set up for that, so we have a good bit of space here. If you don't have a vise, then you can take and hold the blade itself with a sturdy pair of pliers. And then to tighten the blade, tighten the barrel, there are two flats on the barrel itself. You can put an adjustable wrench or maybe a set of vice grips or something on this and tighten it down, and then turn the barrel until it's snug and tight on the blade. Typically, when I've done this in the past, the screw holes that are in the barrel will line up pretty well with the sides of the blade once it's tight. And after that, then we have a assembled cut-to-length blade that is prepped for wiring.
All right, now we have a clean blade. We've got the barrel attached to the blade. So now let's talk about wiring the weapon. Basically, what you're going to do is grab an Epee wire. You'll probably want to grab more than one because the first time out, you'll be a little nervous about putting one together, and sometimes you make mistakes. It's fine. It's the way you get better at it, you practice it. So this Epee wire, several different types. German Epee wire. This is a Epee wire I got from Absolute Fencing Gear. And once it's unraveled, what we try to do is straighten out the wire entirely, pulling out all kinks and turns, checking the insulation to making sure there's no exposed wire. Then what I'll do is I'll grab a lighter and I will burn off some of the flak here. Now, normally what I do is I get them really tight together. I get the two ends tight together and then feed it down through the barrel. That's one way. However, also you can take and feed them down through individually. That way you have more control over feeding the wires through the bottom of the barrel. Now, what we're looking at is with the barrel attached. You want to look down the barrel itself, and you should be able to see a little bit of a daylight through to let you know that you have easy access to the channel through the barrel. Next, what we'll do is go ahead and take one of the ends and fish it through the barrel. We can see straight down through here. And then once we pull that through slightly, fish the other end. I'm just going to feel that through, not look down it, and then start feeding that one through. So now we've got both wires going through the barrel, and then carefully feed the wire through the barrel. Now you want to make sure be patient when you're pulling the wire through. You don't want any kinks, like I said, exposing bare wire to touch the metal, grounding out your blade. So we're pulling through here so slightly, and finally we get down to the bottom of the cap at the top of the barrel. At this point, now we turn, once we set it down into the barrel and we start it, then we grab a tip setter, different types of tip setters. This is one for German wires. This is a generic tip setter that fits over the top of the cap here, so it doesn't press down the leads. You don't want the leads bent or pressed down because it'll mess with the calibration of the weapon when we go to test it. So taking the tip, putting it over the leads, and then pressing it down into the barrel. Make sure it is pressed all the way down, because if it does not go all the way down through to the bottom of the barrel, then what you're going to have is the tip setting up a little higher, and you're not going to be able to get the tip into the barrel of the weapon. Once that is pressed down, then normally what I do is I separate out the wires, keeping a firm grip between the index finger and the thumb, pinching it as I push down, making sure that I have straightened out all kinks, and keeping tension on it, just enough tension to keep the wire set into the channel. Then I press my thumb here in order to, in my left hand, in order to keep the tension while I wrap the wire around the tang. Like I said, this keeps the tension of the wire in the channel, making it easier to glue. Making sure that's set there. Another thing too, if you don't have a tip setter, you can use a Q-tip. You know, if you're in a pinch, just make sure that you're being very careful with it, because you don't want to bend those leads. Next will be our chains, or our bending tool. You take, and one of these is easily made. You can go over to Home Depot and grab a length of chain and 2 pipe ends, and put one end over the barrel and the other end over the end of the tang. So basically, you make sure that the bend is made in such a way as to ensure that the wire is set down into the channel. You'll notice just a second ago, I went ahead and when I went to do the bend, it was bent back a little bit backward. Doesn't matter, because it is set back into the channel correctly. And we put the tension on there. Not too much tension, just enough to lay the barrel down, or lay the wire down into the channel. All right, now we've got the wire set. Now it's time to glue everything down. Everybody has different types of adhesive they like to use. 3M, rubber glue, or just a regular old super glue. I love this stuff. This is Zap CA. You can pretty much cover an entire weapon in about 7 or 8 drops. Now, it is very viscous. It will run. So, and you could run the risk of gluing your fingers together. So be careful when you're using it. One of the things that I like to do, or when I'm prepping to glue, I'll add a little glue up here, and then let it run, a little glue down here, let it run, and then meet in the middle. So just below the barrel, I'll add a little dab of this glue here. And in doing that, it runs up the barrel ever so slightly, and then down the blade. And fortunately with this stuff, it's a great gauge, because as it travels down, you can see it traveling along the insulation. So maybe one dab right there, just that little drop I just put on there pretty much covered it all the way down to almost the middle weak of the blade. And then here, just another dab, and let it run ever so slightly. And then, once it starts slowing down, and I don't have any fear of it backing up into the barrel, then just kind of flip it over and take the zap gap and put it here and let it run down the barrel. Now, these STM blades or Vaniti blades or the Absolute blades, you don't really have any problems with the wire laying down here in the fort very much. There is a tool or device you can get from Leon Paul, which forces the wire down into the channel at the form. So when you're gluing it, make sure that the wire is touching the channel itself. If you don't have some kind of device like that, you may have to hold it down with a screwdriver until the glue sets. Or something that I do is I'll take a Q-tip and kind of bend it over so that the head of the Q-tip is pushed down onto the wire, and then bend it and then fold it back over onto the tang and tape it down. So it acts as kind of like a little press where it presses down with the end of the Q-tip basically taped down to the fort, or I'm sorry, to the tang of the blade. Once it is glued, you want to keep it in the tension, keep the tension on until the glue dries. Or fortunately, when it comes to this particular type of glue, this stuff can dry inside of a minute and a half. So it's great for when you're taking it into the field or into a competition if you've got to glue down a wire immediately. Once it is finished, then basically just take it out of the tension band and voila, you've got a wired weapon. Okay, now let's talk about putting the bell guard on the completed or the wired weapon. Now, you'll see that you have these little divots here. This is to basically line the wire up through the bell guard for right-handed, left-handed, or a more central positioning of the bell guard. This blade is canted for a right-handed fencer. It's a French grip. So what we're going to do is put the bell guard on so that it would facilitate a right-handed fencer. So the larger part protecting the outside line would be facing the outside here, this side, and feed the wires through the hole and then down, feed the insulation through, and then through the middle divot or through the divot and then down onto the form or the bottom of the form. So if you were looking down at this, what you would see is you would see the wire or the insulation going straight through this divot here, right? Unobstructed, not pressed by this corner or this corner, and folded up like this. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to have a lot of superfluous play on the bell guard because that can contribute to compromising the insulation or cutting the wire. Next, in order to add some stability, take the bell pad, of course the larger side facing out, and put the bell pad over the wire. But first, the socket. So the socket, this one has a rather just a neutral positioning here. it's just a square. The absolute sockets have divots high and low for left-handed and right-handed. We're going to take this socket, feed the wires through the hole here, and then feed it down over the tang to here. So now we have the bell guard where the wire is fed through the bell guard. We have the socket where the wire is fed through the socket. Then we take the bell pad, right? Remember, large side facing out, and put it over the entire configuration so that it is over the brace for the socket. And now we have a little bit more stability, so we can work with it a little bit more vigorously. Next would be the adding the French grip. So French grip, very simply, just goes straight over the tang and presses down like this. You'll notice that also these grips have a divot here, basically for the wire to fish through. Okay, so we take and put that over there like this. So if we were looking down through the bell pad, you would see that wire went or was channeled straight through that groove. Can fold the bell pad back over, then take a lock washer over the tang here, keeping the pommel nut, the counterweight to the blade from loosening. Take and screw that down here. Tighten it. You can hand tighten it, or you can use a wrench because of the flats here to tighten it further. Most of the time, just good hand tightening is all it takes. And for our purposes today, we'll just tighten it down here. And then we have the wires and the socket. Now, where the socket is concerned, these posts, we kind of going to want to loosen the posts a little bit so that we have a little bit of daylight between the top of the washer and the bottom of the post. Now, the wires, the extra plaque on the wires will wrap around each post. So normally what I'll do is I'll take and finish off post A, which wraps around the bottom of the post top of the washer. Okay, it's a little loose there, and just wrap it around the post. Let's get a little tighter here so we're not moving as much. There it is. So wrapping around the bottom of the post, and give it one good wrap like this. You don't have to wrap it all the way around and around and around and around too much, and all you need to do is make contact. Now, once it's wrapped around, I like to give it a good solid tug so it's tight. Take your screwdriver, turn it down so that it is secure against the washer. Okay. Next, we take this wire, wrap it around this post thusly. Remember, bottom of the post, top of the washer, then turn it thusly to lock it down. Take the rest of the insulation, tuck it behind the socket, and under the insulation. All right. Now, you notice I don't have a wire cutter for this extra wire here. What I like to do is leave the wire hanging, and then put together the tip assembly. This is the last thing that I remove. Just habit over the years is if there's something wrong at the tip assembly, then I go back in and take everything apart and put it back together, and I still have this residual wire to work with. But let's assume that everything's going to be fine with the wire. So instead of with the tip, so instead of just cutting the wire and having that little bit of extra black off the side, which could lead to issues with inspection, let's go ahead and then just wiggle it to get a cleaner break at the at the edge of the post. So just wiggling back and forth, boom, and you don't have any extra wire sticking out, and you've got a clean break there. So now everything is fully assembled. All we have to do is put the tip together and test it out.
Okay, so now that we have our mostly assembled weapon, we need to install the tip. To do that, we'll need a tip, contact spring, pressure spring, tip screws, as well as a test box and a set of weights and shims. I like to start with the contact spring itself, and that just simply threads onto the end of the tip. So I've got one here that I'm trying to thread in my hands. Once I've got it threaded, I like to leave it pretty long in the beginning and then just sort of check where it sits in the tip for when the test box will go off. So right now we're going off. I can already tell that this isn't going to pass shims, so what I'm going to do is just screw down this contact spring a little bit and then recheck it. Once we get a little bit closer to where I think it'll pass the small shim, I like to do this by quarter turns, and then just do a quarter turn, check, do another quarter turn, check, and once it gets pretty close, I'll actually test it with the small shim. So we're still failing small shims right now, so I'll give it another quarter turn or so. I don't want to go down too far on this because then the contact spring will be too short to touch the contacts in the tip itself, and we'll have to start all over. So at this point, I'm passing on the small shim, and my light is still going off with just a little bit of distance between the tip and the barrel. So at this point, we're pretty good. So from here, I'll take the tip out, add in our pressure spring, and then for now, I'll just set the tip there until I get my screws prepared. For the screws, since they're pretty small, it's good to have a magnetized screwdriver if you can, so that way they're held in place a little bit better. And then you just simply push down on the tip until you can see the hole through the cutout in the barrel. Now sometimes it's hard to get these started. It's good to give it maybe a little bit of a back turn, and usually once you give the screw a little bit of a back turn, you can hear and maybe feel it drop into place. And once you get that, then you can tighten the screw down. You don't want to over tighten these because they can strip out the tip. Usually the screw will fail first, but it is possible to strip out the threading in the tip. So now I've got one screw installed. At this point, I'll go ahead and check the weapon fully. So I'll take the weight, set it over, test weights. So you want the pressure spring to be able to push the weight back up so the test box will stop going off. So here we're passing on the weights, and then I'll check my shims again. So this time we can check the big shim. This just simply has to go over the tip, and we've got a little bit of space here, so we're good for the big shim. And then we'll check the small shim again. We still pass here, and then the last step is to just add in the last tip screw. So once we get this threaded in, it's good to just go ahead and check everything one more time just to be sure. So I'll check small shim, big shim, and then the weight. And since we pass on everything, we're good to go. So now we have a fully assembled, complete, tested, functioning epee.
All right, now we have a newly wired, completely tested, and competition-ready weapon. Now let's talk about maintenance so that your weapon lasts longer, your blade and your wire last longer than 6 months or for an entire season.
So fortunately, there's not too much that you have to do regularly to maintain an epee. The biggest thing is keeping it away from wet gear after practice to make sure that you don't get any rust on the blade. The best way to do that is just to separate out your weapons or let your uniform hang dry. You can also put your weapons in a PVC pipe. That's usually enough to stave off rust. If there are any issues with rust accumulation on the blade, you can take some WD-40 and a little bit of sandpaper and lightly sand those rusted areas. Just make sure that you're careful around the channel where the wires are to make sure you don't damage the wires. The only other thing that I would check regularly is tightness of both the barrel, in case that happens to loosen up, and the grip and bell guard area. You want to make sure that this is tight and not moving around to make sure that you don't pinch or cut the wires with the bell guard or the edge of the grip.
And keep up with rule developments when you go to competitions. Right now, 2 weapons, 2 body cords is the minimum requirement when you go. Keep your body cord and your extra body cord and your weapon at the back of the strip. Test your weapons regularly. Again, cannot reiterate it enough. Like Houston said, if that grip is loose, if the point is loose, tighten them immediately so you do not lose the wire. Test your weapons when you get to the venue. You test them at home, you test them when you get to the venue. You test them after your pool bouts, you test them after your DEs. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. I hope that this was helpful, and I wanted to thank Houston Fullerton for lending his expertise into this subject, as well as to Matthew Brown for his awesome camera work and editing work on these videos. If you have any comments, any tips, tricks that you can add to the video, please leave them in the comments section below. And I want to thank you again for watching. We'll see you soon.